Welcome back, I'm Kimberly and this is Floral Art Review. Today we're looking at a collage, a circular collage. The diameter was 1 metre and it was staged on an easel that was supplied by the organisers of the competition. We had to use Australian native flora in the design and the title was Echoes of the Bush. So my feeling with Echoes of the Bush was that I wanted to symbolise the echo that happens when regeneration happens in the Australian bush after a fire. So I've got the fire side of it as the black side and the dried material and the bark peeling off as the divider. And then on the fresh side, even though it's on the red background, it's the fresh plant material and an indication that life comes after the fire, basically. So it's the echoes of the fire that are replayed into fresh plant material. Always with a collage, our first thought is, how will I supply a water source to the plant material, given that we are presenting a flat surface to the judges. And for this design, had I wanted to, I could have had vials at the back of the backing board and poked the stems through into a water source. But I particularly chose the Banksias because for the duration of this show, which was 2 days, they don't need a water source. So they will sit there quite comfortably. They won't lose any of their vitality over that 2-day period. The leaves, after probably about 4 or 5 days, would start to dry out a little bit and go silver, but still not detrimental to the overall look of the design. So I felt that that was the right choice for me. And the same with the Cresspedia, which is the 3 little yellow balls right on the edge of the design. That they won't lose any colour at all. They can dry quite happily. They don't need a water source in a design. So as I said, I've used Banksias on the one side, on the burnt side, for want of a better term. I've used the Banksia cones and some dried bark. And then on the fresh side, just the Banksia foliage and Banksia flowers and those 3 Cresspedia out on the edge of the design. And that's going to worry me all the way through because I just feel like they're a bit out of place. But let's now see what our AI, Design Eye, has got to say about this design in terms of the principles and elements of design. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened with the design at the end of the video. So looking at colour, first of all, the dominant element here is the high impact colour blocking. The split of deep black and vibrant red creates a powerful graphic background. Against this, the natural muted tones of the bark and the fresh bright greens and yellows of the plant material pop beautifully. So what could have been a very dominant backdrop for this design recedes somewhat because of the placement and the choices in the plant material. So I've gone for very bright colours to contrast against that dominance of the stark difference between the black and the red, and delineated the design along that join between the 2 colours so that the plant material comes towards you and you look at the plant material first on that background. So it's a striking piece, but it's not dominated by the background. The plant material still does dominate the design. We look at line now. There is a highly dominant diagonal line created not just by the painted background, but reinforced heavily by the placement of the peeling bark and the Banksia cones. This harsh line is then softened by the gentle arching secondary line of the fresh green foliage reaching into the red space. So once again, reinforcing that line. Now, the line could have been the circle because it's a very dominant shape. It's a big shape, and I've repeated that circular shape by using the Banksia flowers and by using the Cresspedia. And so it could have been that the line that dominated the design was the circular one rather than the diagonal one. But because of the strength of the bark and the fact that it extends beyond the edges of the design, of the background, means that we are drawn to that first and foremost, and that sets the tone for the rest of the design. We look at that, and it's not actually in the perfect half of the design. I've kept it so that it's a little bit more like 2/3 and 1/3, so that we don't feel like the design is split in half by the different colours or by the bark itself. Texture. This piece is a tactile feast. You have the underlying uniform ridges of the corrugated cardboard, the rough dry peeling of the bark, the tough serrated texture of the Banksia cones, and the soft fresh finish of the leaves and floral heads. So it obviously came from my texture period in designing, but I think that it is important because that also is an echo of the bush. The various and variety of textures within the bush should be echoed in this particular design. So I'm looking at it as the design echoes what I would find in the bush. So it's that range of textures, smooth and rough and shiny and matte. Space and form. As a collage bas relief, it handles 3D space on a 2D plane very well. The heavy mass is concentrated along the fault line between the colours, leaving the red half as active negative space, which gives the eye room to rest and allow the green foliage to breathe. That's true, but I don't think it uses all of the space well enough. Now, one of the things that I need to tell you about the design is that it didn't get judged because the judge felt that it didn't meet the brief, in that it is not a metre in diameter. Now, the schedule said a maximum of a metre diameter, and I took that, as I do in every other competition, to mean that that was the maximum space that could be used. And so my ring is 70 centimetres in diameter because I knew that I wanted to have some overhang across the edges of the design. So it probably comes out to about 80 centimetres with the where the bark overhangs top and bottom. But that still didn't meet with the judge's approval, and so she determined that she wouldn't judge it because it was not according to the schedule in her interpretation, and I have to live with that. It's a debatable point, and it was hotly debated on the day because I wasn't the only one who fell foul of that particular interpretation, but we live with the judge's decision, and so we move on. That said, the space usage, if we ignore that part of it and look at the actual space of the backing board, I feel like I haven't used the bottom part of the red enough. I would like to see either another Banksia flower or some repetition of the Banksia flowers in that bottom part and remove the cruspedia altogether. That just worries me. It just seems to be out there on its own, doing nothing in particular, and it's too small in terms of scale for the rest of the design. And I would just like to see a little bit more use of that red space, not a whole lot, because as it says, it does give you room to rest and to look back at the design, but a little bit more use of it would help the design, I think. Contrast. This design relies almost entirely on extreme contrast, both in colour, black versus red, natural versus painted, and texture, dry and dead materials versus fresh living materials. And that's very true. I wanted there to be a very stark contrast because, once again, the echo of the bush that is being depicted in this design is about the contrast that you find in the Australian bush. Balance. A great example of asymmetrical balance. The dense, heavy visual weight of the black section and the thick bark is balanced by the sheer brightness and volume of the red space, accented by the delicate green branch and the tiny bright yellow placements on the far right edge. Yes, well, if you say so. I don't think it does anything for the balance. The cruspedia, really, if you put your hand over it, it makes no difference to the design if it's not there. So, I just think that the foliage of the Banksia needs to extend a little bit more towards the edge and into that space a little bit more, that lower space a little bit more, so that perhaps there is a matching arm of the fresh Banksia foliage that is about the same size as where the dried cones are on the black side, so that it leaves just a little couple of inches between the tip of where that foliage would be and the edge of the design itself. And I think that would balance it better in my eyes anyway. Dominance. The strong diagonal axis completely dominates the composition, commanding the viewer's eye to travel from the bottom left through to the top right. That's very true, and I'm glad that that is the case. I think it was important to have that line extend beyond the edge of the circle so that you were looking at the whole and complete design, not just what was contained within the circle. Unity. The use of exclusively Australian native materials perfectly unifies the piece under the titles Echoes of the Bush. Well, we didn't really have a choice, but it's good that the choices that I made in terms of that Australian plant material unify the design, because I've kept to just the Banksias and the bark and the silly Craspedia that are over on the other side. But if you take the Craspedia out of it, I've kept to two plant material. So the bark came off a standard gum tree, but the rest of it is all Banksia, dried and fresh. And so that unifies the design. By using that one or two types of plant material, it feels cohesive. It feels like there's a message there in the strength of that plant material and those choices of plant material. So let's now see the suggestions from our AI for improving this design. First one is connecting the echoes. The three yellow floral heads, Billy Buttons, Craspedia on the far right edge, are a wonderful pop of colour, but they feel slightly marooned. They do. To fulfil the idea of echoes, bring one or two smaller yellow elements closer to the central bark cluster. That would create a visual stepping stone effect, tying that far edge back into the main body of the design. I don't see a need for that. I would rather take the Craspedia out altogether and then repeat the Banksia flower. So perhaps get a Banksia flower and slice it up so you've got the smaller slice, the cross sections basically of the flower, and glue them across that bottom edge a little bit lower down than where the Craspedia are now, and that fills that space a little bit, and it repeats the pattern of the plant usage without it being the same form of the plant. That's what I do. Number two is foliage insertion point. The base of the green foliage stem feels a little exposed where it meets the bark. Tucking the origin point of that stem slightly deeper under the bark or a Banksia cone would give it more natural feeling of emergence. And this is quite important, a thing to note, because what it's saying is that the workmanship, the finishing off of the design is not as good as it could be. And that can often mean the difference between getting a placing and not getting a placing. So you really need to have a second look at your design once it's on display, once you think it's ready for judging. Walk away from it, come back, close your eyes, open your eyes, look at it, take a photo, go away and look at the photo of it to make sure that you have tidied up absolutely everything you possibly can so that it is very neat finishes on the design. Nothing feels out of place, nothing looks like it should be a little bit further in as this one does here. So that's a very good pickup in terms of the assessment of this design. Number three is border mechanics. The stitching binding around the edge of the circular board is quite visible. If this is meant to be a rustic textural feature, it works well. However, in strict competition judging, visible construction mechanics can sometimes draw penalties if they aren't viewed as a deliberate part of the artistic interpretation. Ensuring the edge treatment is impeccably neat or deliberately distressed is key here. And that's another good suggestion. What it's saying is that it can see the stitching is there even though I've painted it over. So it looks like it. You shouldn't be able to see it because I've painted over it. So it becomes something, a mechanic that should have been covered better. What I could have done instead, because it's paper covered wire, it would be the same colour as the bark. I should have left it unpainted and so just had the wire going around the edges. And then, as it says, it would be a deliberate part of the design itself, and it would add to that edging of the design too, because it would repeat that colour of the bark around the edge and give it a little bit of an interesting finish at the edges of the design. So once again, a good suggestion and one that I would definitely take on board next time. So there you have our analysis for this week for Echoes of the Bush, the collage. I would encourage you, as I always do, to visit floralartreview.com and have your own designs analysed. It is a completely private and independent analysis for you so that you can learn about what works and what doesn't work in terms of the principles and elements of design. You can get some suggestions that you can try. You can get some reminders, as I did this week, about keeping your work neat and tidy and finishing off things and thinking about the whole of the design, not just parts of the design that you're working on at any one time. It's a simple process, as I said. It's just a matter of logging in, creating yourself an account, which is free, logging in, and then uploading your image. There is a charge for the analysis, a minimal charge for the analysis, and you get it back in less than a minute, basically. And then you've got it for all time. It sits in your account, in your dashboard, and you can reference it, you can go back to it, you can download and print out the report that it gives you. So it's a really good resource in terms of your education in floral art and floral design. And so I really would like to see you using that to help you on your journey. I will leave you for this week. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.